Great. So question 2 is how do you deal with increasing complexity of difficulty of tasks, which I think we're starting to actually get into, but also as the semester progresses. So the idea that maybe when you're introducing the concept, you're doing more simple things on it, and then toward the end of the semester, things have progressed in the level of complexity. And secondly, how do you compare mastery of that simple task to the more complex task?
All right, so I'm starting off on this one. Within that class I was just talking about, I use Canvas, and I'll talk more about this in a later question about how I use Canvas within there. But there's a couple different ways that Canvas grades it, and what I'm looking for is the most recent problem. Oftentimes within this course, the most recent problems are the more complex, especially compared to the problems that we have earlier in the semester. The dimensioning approaches are more complex. The modeling approaches are. They're learning more features and tool sets as they go through. So what I've begun using within Canvas is this 65-35 decaying average, which means that the most recent demonstration of that outcome is 65% of that grade, and then all of the others is a cumulative or is an average um, across that for that last 35%. So Canvas, and I'll talk about this in the next question, has a very specific set of ways that they calculate and integrate the outcomes within there. This was just the best one that I could get to. So what I also do is look at validation. So for every individual in the course, I can actually pull up each outcome and look at the trend for their outcomes to see how their mastery has progressed. So if I see for some reason there's some variability that maybe one problem that I recently gave, the last one was a little bit easier than the last three, I can actually pull up this chart and see were the previous three in that positive trend, or were they a little bit lower than what that most recent demonstration was.
All right, so look forward to talking about Canvas a little bit more in the next section.
So I deal less with complexity changes, perhaps because we separate out learning objectives for easier things versus more difficult things. So if you're talking about like looping structures, when they first learn while and for, that's a different learning objective than when they then have to start using those with indexing or nesting. And so they're completely different learning objectives for us. So I don't have to kind of track their performance across varying problems of different complexity. What we do focus on more is the multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency. So in my example here, they've had to create a single data set plot on an XY plot. And so they had to do that in problem set 2. It came up on exam 1, and then it comes up again in problem set 7. And so along the way, they're getting feedback. And on the problem set, it was probably only worth 1 point. On the exam, that same learning objective might have been worth 3 to 5. And so it's more about the multiple opportunities, and all of the point values stick for the whole semester and are part of their final
All right,
grade.
so that's a good other perspective, which is that potentially within the learning objectives themselves, those are measuring something that's a more complex task.
So I mentioned earlier that I sort of look at approaching the course that I teach with projects as a fail early approach, hopefully to succeed later. And I would say that it's not necessarily that the tasks are more complex, but that the structure and how they're presented to students is a little bit different. So early introductory activities that I do in my class, the students are provided with a very lockstep. Here are the tasks that you have to do around each one of the learning objectives. And in some cases, some of those activities assess multiple learning objectives. As we move to the second activity, it becomes a little bit more open-ended, but it's still a little bit lockstep. So the first activity, they're designing something. The second activity, they're actually looking at a product that someone else has already designed. And that builds up to the final project where it's extremely open-ended. So instead of me saying model this aspect of a product that someone else has designed, I tell them you're designing your own product and you have to identify what models are appropriate for this particular project. And it's not just for the sake of doing a model, but what's going to inform you in being able to design something specifically for a user. And they do have, in this particular class, an actual partner. We usually partner with a local organization, either a school or a museum. And so these are open-ended challenges. So the complexity is sort of built in based on the structure of the project itself, yet they're still being assessed on the same learning objectives. They're still doing similar types of tasks. In essence, the complexity doesn't really change. It's just more the structure. And again, hopefully that allows them to sort of work towards it's okay if I don't do so well at the beginning of the class in terms of some of these introductory activities, but it obviously will hurt you a little bit more if you haven't learned from those mistakes that they made early, so that later on they can be successful.
All right, great insight there about the structure actually enhancing the complexity in that.
So with my course, like Heidi, we evaluate their progress on different objectives multiple times throughout the semester. And so when we first start the course, like we have the same expectations for them at the beginning of the course than we do at the end of the course. So naturally, what I found is that when I initially give them the early on assessments, I assess them very harshly, and they usually do very poorly right away. And so I try to use that in a sense to be able to set the bar in terms of, hey, in order for this particular skill with this project, this is sort of the expectation. And so students typically take some time to kind of get up to that. So I guess the complexity really doesn't change in the sense that they're still kind of doing the same skill development throughout the semester, but their just abilities to meet that level sort of evolves over time, and they're able to eventually kind of get up to that level. So again, we look at each objective multiple times throughout the semester, but the complexity, again, on that skill, really, we set the bar, I guess, right from the get-go of the course very high, and it remains the same level throughout the course.
And Matt, I believe that you're actually, this is at a senior level, right? So this is capstone design.
Correct, yeah.
And
This is the senior capstone
I think
project,
everyone
yeah.
else is teaching lower level or freshman courses. So that might also be part of that difference in structure, difference in approach, at how you're kind of setting the bar at the beginning. Just some food for thought.